This is the primal scream of a dying regime.
Pray for our enemies, because we're going medieval on these people. You're just not got a free shot on all these networks lying about the people. The people have had a belly full of it. I know you don't like hearing that. I know you try to do everything in the world to stop that, but you're not going to stop it. It's going to happen.
And where do people like that go to share the big lie? MAGA media. I wish in my soul, I wish that any of these people had a conscience.
Ask yourself, what is my task and what is my purpose? If that answer is to save my country, this country will be saved.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Thursday, 13th of August, Anno Domini 2026. Harnwell here at the helm on Steve Bannon's War Room. Fantastic, folks. Fantastic show today. Going to go straight into this now. We've got one of the leading thinkers in Christian nationalism joining us today from our friends over in the Protestant sphere, the Presbyterian sphere, Pastor C.R. Wiley, who's just booked out just a couple of weeks ago, called Man-Made, St. Anthony's Guide to Surviving the AI Apocalypse. Interesting book. I particularly like the philosophical approach here, that with the looming reality of the singularity and transhumanism on the agenda, all of these things that had sort of kept mankind's humility, let's put it like that, in check, seem to be conquerable by science, and that puts mankind in a certain question mark position of how we're actually going to cope if these things, these realities beyond our control, those inhibitions on man's reach, if these things dissolve, what happens to mankind? This is the great question. Pastor Wiley, thank you very much for coming on to the War Room. Tell me a little bit now. Most of our audience will actually be relatively fluent in the concept of transhumanism, thanks to Steve Bannon's pushing this along with Joe Allen for many years now. Tell us your approach to the concept and why you decided to write this specific book, because I think it comes at a particular important time in both. It's providential, really. It comes not only in America's history, but also mankind's path towards what mankind would like to believe. Some elements of mankind would like to believe would be limitless potential. So tell us your why you've done this. Obviously, as a pastor, there's going to be a very strong Christian theological element to this. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Ben, thanks for having me on. When it comes to the inspiration behind it, the inspiration is simply the fact that we are living in a major shift in terms of our society, our culture. There's a kind of tsunami that's washing over us right now and washing many things away that we've taken for granted. And then the things that are emerging that this new technological development has made possible are things that we're going to need to adjust to and find ways to live with and remain human as we do so. You noted that the transhumanists are very enthusiastic about these developments because they believe they can more or less use them to level up and transcend the limitations that human beings have known in the past. And I'm pretty skeptical about those claims, but I do believe that a lot of damage could be done in the name of transhumanism. So those are some things that were on my mind as I explored the subject. And as a pastor, I'm mostly interested in just how the people that I serve as a pastor are going to be affected by these developments and what advice I could give them that hopefully will be helpful. So that's what's behind the book.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the concept that these problems that mankind has been wrestling with for, let's say, 4,000 years? What you think happens to mankind's concept of itself, of himself, when things like death, for example, let's start with the simplicities. Death is no longer treated as a problem to that limits mankind, but as a technological problem to be to overcome. How does mankind relate to, say, something like Christianity, for example, whose promise is eternal life? But of course, the doorway through death is something that we have to pass through. If mankind, and I treat with a certain skepticism some of the promises of transhumanism, but let's take for the sake of argument that mankind is able to merge spiritually and physically with machines. How does mankind deal with the promises of Jesus Christ in a world that no longer suffers human death? I mean, from one perspective, and it's a diabolical proposition, but from one perspective, does man actually have any need of Christ anymore as the antidote to death if we're no longer confronted with the prospect of dying?
Well, certainly people like you all know Harari or Ray Kurzweil or Brian Johnson would say we don't. Basically, they've tried to reconceive of what we've been promised as Christians in technological terms, basically engineering terms. So historically, as Christians, we've understood the promise of eternal life and the resurrection of the body and so forth as being accomplished by the work of God. What they've done is taken essentially the eschatological vision that Christians have had from the start and made it something that really is reduced to an engineering project. And in order to do that, they've had to reduce human beings to machines. So they often will kind of in a flippant way refer to human beings as meat machines, and that consciousness is just simply something that is generated biochemically, but doesn't have any relationship to, say, older ideas or older convictions about the soul or the spirit. So the prospect that we're dealing with now is basically human beings are, as Harari has said, understood as hackable animals. And what we want to do, according to these folks, is essentially hack the animal and level up, make ourselves divine in a way that is the product of our own technical acumen. So, two things. One of the things, of course, that the transhumanists want to transcend is death, the sort of the hard limit on the end of life, that as we know it in the body, in the world as we experience it physically, but also expand consciousness, but also knowledge to the degree that artificial intelligence develops. So there's a real, in order for all this to happen, there has to be a merger with the machine. And Christians, of course, have always understood life in God, eternal life, as being something that we enjoy because of our relationship with God through Christ. But what these folks have in mind is something along that line, but instead of God, we make God in our image, and then it makes it possible for us to live indefinitely. So that's the challenge. We're dealing with an alternative eschatology, an alternative vision of the end of the world.
Do you see this project as, forgive me for just saying this, coming out and saying this, but do you see this project as fundamentally satanic?
Well, yes, I think so. I think that there are people who say that they're Christians who try to hold this all together. Someone I think like Peter Thiel, I think would qualify, but what I think they've done is they've made a fatal error, and I do think that what we're seeing is a recapitulation of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. There's a sense in which the temptations are the same, the false promises are the same, and we shouldn't be surprised. This is something that doesn't just simply characterize a particular moment in time in the past, but the entire sweep of human history could be understood as this temptation that we revisit again and again and again to to make ourselves like gods.
Tell me, why did you choose Saint Anthony?
Well, when I was doing my work researching the subject, Ray Kurzweil, of course, is a very prominent figure in transhumanist circles, and it occurred to me just as a kind of as a flash of insight that the antithesis for Ray Kurzweil was Anthony, and so I thought, well, maybe there's something Anthony has to say that could help me, help others think about the temptation that we're facing and what is the Christian way of thinking about it and the Christian hope. So I turned to him mainly as a way to do that, but also as a way to think about the temptations that we are going to be subject to. So I think that the temptations are going to be significant and very seductive. Most of them are going to be wrapped up initially in the language of healthcare, but long term, what I think we're going to see is a move from healthcare to basically approaches to, well, the transhumanist project, where we're going to be, told that in order for us to become more intelligent, we're going to literally need to be neurally linked to artificial intelligence, and if we're going to participate in the economy, that'll be necessary as well. I think these are the sorts of things that we're going to be presented with as temptations.
And the antidote to temptations are fundamentally humility and trust in God.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we should recognize or remember that we already have marvelous promises, and those promises are what are the source of our hope and the comfort that we have in life and in death. So we shouldn't cash those promises in for something that's a fraudulent and a bad copy. And I think that's what the transhumanist project can be somewhat summed up as.
Pastor Wiley, stay with me one moment. I'll be back to continue our conversation in just 2 minutes. Time to give a shout out to the show's sponsor today, Birch Gold. I'm going to start off. You might have seen, folks, that it was announced yesterday that the US budget deficit surged in July to its highest level since March 2021. The upshot of this is governments across the world normally, when their deficit expands, the national debt expands, that debt is inflated away. Governments to print money effectively in one way or another in order to pay off their own debt. In which case you will, for all the reasons that we discuss every day on the show, you will no doubt, especially the retail investors among you, be seeking an alternative because to investments and to savings, especially cash-based savings, because they're going to be hit first in any asset inflationary period. And gold, of course, is the historic safety harbor in times of turbulence when seeking to store values of wealth. So text Bannon, BANNON, to 989898. Speak to Philip Patrick and his team who are standing by. These are the worldwide experts, especially for retail investors. But not only, not exclusively. It is their job. That's why they're there. They're there on the end of the phone to give advice on how you might cross over an old IRA into an IRA in physical gold. They do exist. And if, like me, you don't really know what that entails or how to open one or how to put savings into one, text Bannon, BANNON, once again, to 989898 and speak to Philip Patrick and his team, and they will listen to what your personal circumstances are and give you the best advice accordingly. They are the people to speak to. Once again, Bannon, BANNON, to 989898. Okay, back now with Pastor Wiley. Pastor Wiley, one of the reasons that I was particularly enthusiastic about speaking to you on the show is because, along with Pastor Doug Wilson, you are one of the great thinkers in America presently, fleshing out this concept of Christian nationalism. I know you've got this, you're involved in this project. We won't go into details now. Perhaps come back and talk to us a little bit more about Battleground up in, I think it's Washington State, isn't it? Tell us more about that. But about Christian nationalism itself, I want to ask you, because there are some views kicking around, and the War Room is definitely a show that promotes Christian nationalism. In fact, we like to suggest it's one of the great arenas where Bible-believing conservative evangelicals can come together and work with traditionalist Catholics, putting aside the theology, putting aside the differences, but fundamentally fighting in the public square for a Christ-based culture and politics. What I wanted to ask you, and I think some of your own thinking here has pushed up pretty closely on this, Christianity is not particularly tolerated even in the modern secular world. But if it is tolerated, it's the form that leaves Christianity as no more than warm and fuzzy feelings, right? But if you try to go break out of that, the reservation, if you will, of warm and fuzzy feeling based Christianity, and actually try to use biblical revelation, Old and New Testament biblical revelation, as the basis of politics, well, then you really see the intolerance against Christianity. And I think that's what Christian nationalism promises. Could you tell us a bit about your own work here, specifically on the idea of a locally focused form of Christian nationalism? And as the background of this, I'll just simply say this, and as I say, we don't really have time to go into it, but one of your most famous contributions to the debate in Battleground is this idea that the 10 Commandments should be the basis of law. Now, of course, that's going to be meat and two veg to pretty much all of the audience, pretty much standard fare, but leaving the rarefied confines of MAGA world and going out into the secular sphere, they think that, they start sort of dreaming up ideas of those handmaidens with the red robes and the white hats, and all this. In your own words, Pastor Wiley, what do you mean by Christian nationalism? And why do you think now is a particularly providential time to be working towards that?
Well, I believe in nations, for one thing, and I do believe that nations are informed by some kind of vision of what's best and the good. And so consequently, as a Christian, I can't help but say, this is best, this is good, this is true. I was strongly influenced years ago in the early 1990s by a book by a fellow named Leslie Newbegin entitled Truth to Tell, The Gospel is Public Truth. And essentially what he was dealing with was this tendency that we have to privatize and neuter the Christian faith. That's simply not something that we can reconcile with the American experience. For example, John Witherspoon, who was a Presbyterian and a minister and a college president, was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. This is one of those things where you can just say, well, how do you reconcile the fact that this fellow not only was one of the signers, but one of the most influential forces in the Continental Congress and so forth, and did so much to train so many of our leaders?
So it's not true then that the founders were just basically a bunch of deists who believe in the mechanical God sort of thing. That's just that's a happy, fond reinvention of the secularists.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, maybe we can say some things about Jefferson and Franklin, but what do you do with Witherspoon? This is a guy who actually went out and preached and rallied Presbyterians in New Jersey and Pennsylvania to support the cause of the American Revolution, and he did so explicitly in biblical language. He appealed to the covenant and how the king had violated the terms of the covenant, and consequently the people had a right to rise up and rebel. So everything he, we can say about his influence and his work was informed by his Christian faith. He didn't put it on the shelf. He didn't say, oh, well, this is not something that should be spoken about in public. So since that's the case, and I think we could go through the Founding Fathers and find many other examples, I wouldn't waste any time trying to, sort of read the mind of Thomas Jefferson or Ben Franklin or even John Adams. But I can say that, those fellows those men didn't have any problem working with John Witherspoon. So on that point alone, I think we have a basis historically for saying Christian leaders can speak publicly and without apology or without any kind of self-censorship when it comes to their Christian convictions and how those inform government. So I think that's a big that's important for me as I reflect on my role as a pastor in public life, whether we're talking about in a local environment like a place like Battleground or beyond. Sometimes I describe myself as post-secular in the sense that I don't think that secularism has a future. I think its days are numbered, and I've been thinking about doing some work on that, but I don't have anything much to share about it yet. But I did spend time at Harvard Divinity School. I lived in Cambridge for a decade between Harvard and MIT. I have a pretty I guess a good sample when it comes to kind of the thinking of secularists and people on the progressive end of the left spectrum. Lived with them, talked to them, worked with them for years. So I didn't expect my convictions on this matter to be warmly received. It was just kind of, it's just a fact that there are people who really are banking on a kind of secular utopia and don't have any room for people like me. But I don't intend to be quiet about the subject.
What do you think is going to be the prospect for the development of Christian nationalism in America specifically over the course of the next generation? Do you think it's going to depend at all on who's in the White House? I mean, I asked that because under a certain light, it would appear that the movement has grown a lot since the time that Donald Trump has been on the political scene. Do you, for certain obvious reasons, because he's shown conservative biblical Christians that they can win at the ballot box. Whether what they're getting is always what they intended when they voted is a separate question, sure, as it always is. Right. But it indicates that that the inevitability of the liberal progressive agenda, as exemplified, say, by Hillary Clinton, can actually be blocked. If enough people come together. Do you think so that's what I mean when I say this. Do you think that the movement of Christian nationalism can now move forward and continue to grow, irrespective of who's going to be in the White House over the coming years?
I think so. I think the primary reason for that is the failures of the promises that have been made on the left. I think those are becoming more and more evident, less. I think people are finding it less plausible that those things could be explained away, and in the values vacuum, I think there are people who are hungry for something to fill it. They want something to fill it. And when it comes to the Christian faith, I think that the Christian faith, because it's true, I don't believe it. Let me put it this way. Christianity isn't true because I believe it. I believe it because it's true. And because I have that conviction, I'm going to make that case. These things are true. And I think that those truths should inform our public life, our entertainment, and so forth. Now, how that is carried out, how that is all instituted, that's all open. We can talk about that. But I do think something's going to fill the void.
We've got like a minute left. I just want to ask you if you can give me a minute answer on this. As a pastor, as a theologian, as a public commentator, why do you I absolutely agree with you that secularism has really had its moment because it's manifestly failing. My question is, why is it that because everybody is seeing the same set of facts, right? Why is it Christians can look at these facts and say, yep, secularism's failing, but the secularists themselves aren't reaching the same conclusion?
Well, I think it's because their hearts are in secularism, and it's a very difficult thing to admit that your God has failed, or the things that you believed to be the case didn't work. So I'm not surprised. I think that there will be a lot of folks who just go to their graves holding on to the convictions that they have concerning, secularism and so forth. And I'm related to some of these people. It's not like these people are aliens to me. I mean, they're in my family, so, but I do believe that the time is up, and that it's going to become harder and harder for them to justify. And it's not just Christians who are looking to fill the vacuum. There are lots of other groups that will try to too.
As we mentioned on the show yesterday, in Europe, the numbers of adult baptisms in the most secular places on the planet are increasing year by year. Pastor Chris Wiley, author of Man-Made St. Anthony's Guide to Surviving the AI Apocalypse. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Very quickly, where do people on social media reach out to you or follow your analysis?
Well, I'm on X and I'm on Facebook. So those are a couple of places that I'm, checking in on every day.
That's CR Wiley 1962. Pastor Wiley, many thanks indeed. Do come back again at some point. Back in 2 minutes after this short break.
Still America's Voice family.
Are you on Getter yet? No?
What are you waiting for?
It's free.
It's uncensored.
And it's where all the biggest voices in conservative media are speaking out.
Download the Getter app right now. It's totally free. It's where I put up exclusively all of my content 24 hours a day. You want to know what Steve Bannon's thinking? Go to Getter.
That's right. You can follow all of your favorites. Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, Jack Posobiec.
And so many more.
Download the Getter app now.
Sign up for free and be part of the movement.
Welcome back. Well, earlier this week, folks, you might have seen the images from the Oval Office as President Trump just announced the new guidelines separating out a number of vaccines because of the concern that they might be primary causes of autism. Therefore, we have the author, I think, of the one of the key books in the field, not necessarily related to the idea, the Make America Healthy Again idea of separating out the vaccines, but going into the idea of whether things like autism, for example, or the attention deficit disorder are overly defined, overly diagnosed, whether they're even neurological conditions at all. Sami Timimi, the author of Searching for Normal, a new approach to understanding mental health, distress, and neurodiversity. The book came out in 2025, but I think it's particularly providential at this moment in time. Sami, welcome onto the show. I'm going to get you to break down for us, if you wouldn't mind, in about 10 minutes, just your reaction to the news I was mentioning about the changing of the guidelines with regards to the vaccine schedules and separating them out a bit. What I really wanted to, as someone who has practiced as a psychiatrist, yourself professionally, and a psychologist as well, if I'm not mistaken, both disciplines, I'd like to ask you what it is you mean for a non-specialized audience, what it is you mean when you question whether something like autism is in fact a neurological condition.
Well, in my work, and particularly in this latest book, I've been questioning the whole idea of mental health how we think about it, how we categorize it. And I've tried my best to point out that the way we've categorized and understood what we call mental health is based on a set of subjective ideas that don't have any empirical support within the science. So all our definitions of mental health, and that includes our definitions of autism and ADHD and the whole neurodiversity paradigm, are based on subjective ideas. They don't track to any definitive biological or indeed psychological correlate that you can measure in any empirical way. So there is an important difference to understand between something like how we define something like, say, diabetes. We don't define diabetes by reference to the sorts of symptoms that you may experience, because common symptoms like, for example, feeling thirsty, going to the toilet a lot, fatigue, can appear with a number of different conditions, but also diabetes itself may not present in that way at all. We define diabetes by reference to blood sugar that's too high. And whilst there may be all sorts of discussions about how high blood sugar should be before we define it as diabetes, there's no discussion about the idea of blood sugar. Blood sugar is a measurable quantity, and you can then track what happens to treatment. But when it comes to mental health conditions, we're talking about things that are defined by subjective means. For example, if you take something like ADHD, it's defined by reference to certain behaviors. And all the so-called symptoms, they're not symptoms really, not in a medical sense, they're just behaviors, start with the word often. So take, for example, the idea of often squirms in their seat, which is one of the things that are listed as symptoms. Well, how often is often? At what age? What's a unit of squirm? How much movement do you have to have? So the problem with all these definitions is that, in fact, we literally don't know what we're talking about when it comes to many mental health conditions, and particularly in the neurodiversity area, which means that in certain circumstances, these definitions can be expanded. And that's what's happened. We're in a time, I believe, where culturally speaking and economically speaking and politically speaking, there is a lot of uncertainty. People are feeling insecure, lonely. They don't have a sense of things that give them meaning beyond narrow consumer choices. And in those circumstances, these definitions can expand, and they've expanded horizontally by including lesser extremes of behavior, and they've expanded vertically by changing the criteria to introduce new populations. And there's a lot of people making a lot of money by this kind of quackery that's going on.
Okay, a couple of things there that I want to ask you about. Firstly, if a mental illness doesn't manifest in actual objective symptoms, characteristics that you can point out on an X-ray and say, look, there it is. Were you suggesting that no mental illnesses, inverted commas, exist?
What I'm suggesting is,
okay.
Sorry, yeah.
No, please go ahead.
What I'm suggesting is that the paradigm, if you like, the framework that we use for understanding what we're referring to as mental illnesses is not the one that is supported by our current scientific knowledge. What is important for us to do is to understand that our way of thinking about and classifying and dealing with, if you like, distress, mental suffering, is something that requires a different framework for understanding. one of the things that we have in common as humans is that we want to make sense of our situations. But the meaning-making framework that we use has a profound effect on how we interpret the experiences that we are having. So if you take a meaning-making framework that tells you that what your distress or your discomfort or your loneliness or your sense of alienation is because there's something wrong in you, that in itself can reinforce an idea that there is something that you have no control over, something that you need to maybe take a pill for, something that maybe you need to go for a lot of therapy for to try and fix something within you. But if you take a different meaning-making framework, that suffering is part of the human condition, and that the ways we respond to that it can be quite meaningful, and that we need people around us to help us, and that can include professionals, you enter a different meaning-making framework where the chances for recovery and making progress and finding meaning in your suffering increases.
You're not exactly an outsider here with these ideas, and I misspoke earlier when I said psychiatrist. I meant psychotherapist. You've practiced as a you've practiced as a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist. I think I put in the wrong term in the introduction. So you're not an outsider then with these contributions. How much are they accepted by the rest of the inverted commas scientific community?
Within psychiatry, this would be considered a minority view, but it is a significant minority. There are, I'm part of, and I'm currently the co-chair of something called the Critical Psychiatry Network, and we have hundreds of doctors on that network who are basically saying that we've got it wrong. We've got it wrong for a long time in the way that we approach distress and in the way that we try and help people deal with distress. Within the broader psychotherapy community, I'm probably in the majority. I think a lot of people have been scratching their heads and thinking, what the hell is going on at the moment? How is it that we've got more services than ever, we've got more publicity, more anti-stigma campaigns, etc., and yet our mental health as a society seems to be getting worse? This is sometimes referred to as the treatment prevention paradox. If the approach that we were taking was actually improving our mental health, we should not see this continuous increase in the numbers of people who become long-term mental health patients, who become disabled by their mental health condition. We should not be seeing that as a society. So that there's general agreement that we've got things badly wrong, and that we need to rethink how we approach mental distress and mental suffering.
Sami Timimi, bear with me for 30 seconds. I'm going to come back and continue this conversation in just a moment. Time to give a shout out to the show's sponsors right now, this time America's Health Share. If you're one of the millions frustrated by traditional health insurance, I want to talk to you about America's Health Share. Go to freedomforhealth.org/Bannon, BANNON, and discover why tens of thousands of American patriots are joining America's Health Share. America's Health Share reduces your healthcare costs by an average of 60%, and it is accepted everywhere, so you can say goodbye to out-of-network limitations. America's Health Share makes healthcare affordable, transparent, and it is aligned with your values. For as low as $68 per month, an individual can get great health coverage, minus all the complications and price gouging from the larger healthcare providers. Once again, go to freedomforhealth.org/Bannon to learn more. If you do that now, you'll get 3 months of coverage with promo code Bannon. Once again, Freedom for Health, all one word, freedomforhealth.org/Bannon, promo code Bannon. We're continuing the conversation now with Sami Timimi, author of Searching for Normal. Sami, when I was sort of reading up on the background of your book and your thesis, the question that came to my mind most often is how is it that the medical industry has got this wrong so much and so repeatedly? And I don't want to put the words into your mouth, but is it basically big pharma? Is it basically that the whole of the medical profession has been guided towards medication as the solution to things like you're saying, suffering, to various degrees of mental health, where your approach, I think, seems to be, if I use the word holistic, you're more involved in bringing in the family, bringing in the local community to help people through, if I may put it like this, a non-medicated form of a non-medicated solution. Would that be about right as your approach?
I think that's on the right lines. In terms of drivers, what would be behind this is there are many factors. And Big Pharma is an important one because they have the money. And I think Big Pharma realized a long time ago that in order to find profits in a very lucrative area and a very poorly defined, and as I say, something that's very subjectively defined, is that you have to promote the diagnoses. So they involved themselves in promoting diagnoses, for example, the idea that depression is a discrete, identifiable condition that is treatable by things that they started to mislabel as antidepressants. There's no such thing as an antidepressant, by the way. These are just substances that affect your mental state, have lots of problems in terms of side effects and withdrawal issues and so on. And you keep those quiet and you've opened up a market. However, what happened since then is that a lot of other things came on the coattails of that. So you've developed what I call a whole mental health industrial complex, which includes a lot of different sectors that make a significant amount of profit out of medicalizing distress and suffering. So therapies, books, journals, podcasts, courses, influencers, etc., and very expensive assessments. So there's a whole range of products that get associated with the lucrative diagnoses. The lucrative diagnoses like ADHD, autism, bipolar, depression, anxiety disorder, these became big money makers.
I wish I had more time to talk to you about this. I don't know if we're gonna have time to ask you to tell me what your take is on the president's changing of the guidelines and separating out. Look, we've got 3 minutes left. What was your because obviously a huge part of our audience is fully on board with the Make America Healthy Again agenda. And there is an overlap philosophical overlap in what you're saying here. And I'd like to ask you more, we can't do it for lack of time, about to say more about what you mean when you say there's no such thing as antidepressants, because a lot of people are on them. I guess some people who, in sheer terms of numerical averages, there'll be people who follow this show who will have been given a prescription by their doctor for antidepressants. We should talk more about that. But as someone who's practiced as a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist, tell me just what was your take, and someone who's written this book then, Searching for Normal, what was your take this week on the president's changing the guidelines? Because a lot of people are interested in this.
Well, I'm not sure that in itself will make much of a difference. I mean, anything that maybe reduces the load because
you don't necessarily believe that autism, as a lot of people think of it as a diagnosable condition, actually does exist. So if it's a question mark over its neurological basis, then presumably you'd work backwards and say then perhaps it's not a vaccine-led thing, right? Okay.
Exactly. Autism started as being defined as a condition that was considered to be extremely rare. And the original prevalence was something like 4 in 10,000 of children who were significantly disabled in many ways, who had moderate to severe learning difficulties and were unlikely to be able to live independent lives, and had considerable clinical, social and educational needs that required a lot of support. But now autism spans all the way up to people like Einstein, who've been suggested to have autism. In other words, in terms of functioning, we've taken the full human spectrum of functioning, right from people who are likely to require considerable amount of support for the rest of their lives, right up to the geniuses who have shaped science, culture, and our world more broadly. So it's fairly obvious that the needs of people at that end of the spectrum are different to the needs of the people who require a lot of support. And because unless we disentangle this confusion, we don't know what we're dealing with when we talk about a link between vaccines and autism.
So your thesis is primarily that the issue is big pharma, it's the medical communities. What did you call that? The industrial, the mental health complex.
Industrial complex. Yeah.
It's their rushing to diagnose autism, which is fundamentally the issue, rather than lumping together certain vaccines.
The expansion of that concept. Yeah.
Fantastic. Sami Timimi, author of Searching for Normal. The book is available on Amazon. Where do people go to follow you, either to get the book or to follow you on social media?
I mean, I've got a website, samitimimi.co.uk, and I'm on X, where my handle, I think, is @stimimi, and occasionally I'm on Instagram, which is at I think it's Dr._Sami Timimi.
And the X, you're absolutely right, is S. Timimi. Many thanks indeed to Robert, Real America's Voice, and to Vittorio Santifranco for putting this show together. Steve, back at 10 a.m. tomorrow.